Okay, this is the basic venture capital formula, that handout, and it's page number 3. I'm just doing this by page right now, or by subject matter. This is page number 3. And so basically this is saying computing implied valuation. This says it's possible to infer the value of a company as a whole given the percent ownership the VC will obtain. If, for example, one third of the venture is purchased for $4 million, then the venture as a whole has an implied value of 12 million because he's getting one third of the company for 4 million. That tells you that that's one third of the value. So you can do it times 3, the 4 million, or you can divide it by 0.333. Remember, when a number represents less than 100%, you can always divide it by what that number represents and get the 100% value. So in this case, $4 million represents 0.333%. You could divide it by, because it's less than 100%, right? So you can divide it by 0.333, and that gets you to 12 million, which is 100% of the value of the company since he's only buying a third of it. So just remember that, okay? So it says that this quantity is referred to as the post-money valuation. The investor puts his money in, what's the company's worth afterwards? Okay, so because it is the valuation applicable after financing. Okay, so in the previous example, the guy put in $3.5 million on one of the earlier pages. And he got 70.9% of the company. So you take this 3.5, that represents 70.9%. So you divide 3.5 million by 70.9%, and that gets you the 100% value of the entire company is 4.9 million. It says the post-money valuation is the most frequently used valuation figure. Okay, so it is sometimes important to consider the value attributable to only the portion of the company not purchased in the financing round. This is called pre-money valuation. Remember, a lot of times the startup companies, most of what they put into it is their hard, their time and their effort and everything, not getting compensated for it, which is basically they talk about down here called their sweat equity. So their pre-money valuation may not be what they've put into it cash-wise, but their total time invested also. So pre-money valuation is the post-money valuation minus the new investment from the VC. So in the case of the $12 million and the 4 million, if the guy's putting in 4 million and the post money valuation is 12 million, it'd be 12 minus 4 means that the pre-money valuation was 8 million. Or in the case of where the guy put in 3.5 million and the post money valuation was 4.9, that means that the pre-money would be 1.4, right? That's what the original owner's equity was worth before. It's called the pre-money valuation, what it was worth. Okay, so it says the carried interest of a given shareholder or group is the valuation of that portion of the company owned by that party after financing. So in the case of the original or the VC, after financing, in this case, where there's a 3.5 million, after financing, his is still worth 3.5 million. But there was really no valuation given beforehand for the founders. So now it's 1.4 million is what's called their carried interest. Okay, so carried interest equals post-money valuation, which is 4.9, right? Times their percentage of ownership. So in this case, it would be the 4.9 times 1. They own, the venture capitalist owns 70.9%, so they own 29.1%. So it'd be the 4.9 million times the 29.1%. They put 1 minus 70.9, but it's still 20.9%, which gets you to that 1.4 million. So the carried interest of the new investors, the VC in this case, is equal to the value of their investment because they just put it in, right? In the case of the startup, the founder's carried interest constitutes the entire pre-money valuation. It is a value assigned to their technology, their hard work, otherwise known as sweat equity. Okay, and they may have had some cash in there too, but that's what carried interest is in the case of the original founders. Okay, so using the above formula, the founders' carried interest is the post-money valuation of 4.9% times what their ownership is. Well, you know the VC owns 70.9%, so they own 1 minus that. They own 29.1%, which equals 1.4 million. So it says the above items can be represented in terms of shares. So post-money valuation is the new price times the total shares, right? Pre-money valuation is the new price times whatever shares the original owners had. And if you know what that is, then you could figure out their pre-money valuation, or you could figure it out this way. Carried interest is the new price times the shared own. This is their pre-money valuation. This is their carried interest. The new price times the number of shares that they owned. So there might have been a pre-money valuation that was lower. We're talking about post-money valuations up here. Okay, so that's page 3 on the basic venture capitalist worksheet. Handout.